Well, today in Philadelphia, Roy Halladay was officially introduced to the media, and in true Halladay fashion, he started by thanking Toronto. Now, it's unfortunate that due to the economic disparity in the game, he couldn't finish his career with the Jays. He wanted to go with a contender, and us you spend, you can't contend. Philly spends. Claude Faig has more in this report.
I'd like to start, first of all, by thanking everybody in Toronto, the fans, the organization, the people. It's been a big part of my life and something I'll never forget.
The dealing of Roy Halladay to the Phillies proved to be a complex three-team trade, initiated by the Phillies at the baseball winter meetings, consummated last Sunday, and finalized Wednesday, sending the 12-year Jay and winning his pitcher in the majors since 2002 to the Phillies, along with $6 million, a place the 32-year-old had long made a pitch for.
It was an easy decision for me. I think once the opportunity came up to be a part of this, it was something I couldn't pass up. And, I think there's, things not only in business but in life that, are worth it. And for me, this was one of those things.
It is Sportsfeld Storytime. We are back once again to close out the Halladay versus Burnett Sportsfeld Storytime 2009. What a time to be a Blue Jays fan. I was a big-time 2009 Blue Jays fan. Not afraid to say it. In the last episode, we looked at Roy Halladay, one of his last true gems, the complete game win over A.J. Burnett and the New York Yankees. The pinnacle of that season as they would then go on a gigantic losing streak. They would hit the garbage pail, and the Yankees would win the World Series. But for one night, Halladay was the correct answer, and Burnett was the loser. And we booed him off the field, and it felt so good. It was a fun time that night. It would then sort of morph into this is what being a Blue Jays fan is in this era. And really the question after that, the question after that was, what is going to become of Roy Halladay? And we knew that there was a chance he was going to get traded. I believe he was 1 year away from free agency, and it was, similar to, I think, what we went through in March of this year with Kyle Lowry, of like, do you get nothing for Roy Halladay, and you wanted to get something, and Alex Anthopolous took this team over in October 3rd, 2009. Alex Anthopolous took over. And December 16th, Harry Leroy Halladay III is traded to the Philadelphia Phillies for Travis d'Arnaud, Kyle Drabek, and Michael Taylor. They then shifted. This is the thing that people forget. They then traded Michael Taylor for Brett Wallace. Remember Brett Wallace?
I do remember. I remember being very high on both those guys. I remember like this was a big period as Blue Jays fans of like talking yourself into lesser returns. Let's say.
Listen, I thought Kyle Drabek was going to be really good. I was like, Kyle Drabek, that's a guy.
And he was also one of those guys where like every spring he'd put together like 4 innings.
Yeah.
And you're like, it's happening. It's Kyle Drabek time.
Reminds me of Sean Reed Foley. If you want to make a modern day, so it's like every year you're like, man, if Reed Foley finds the command, look out. Never finds the command. No. So yeah, it was. I remember being very sad about this, of course, because Halladay was a lifelong Blue Jay and such a great journey he had made. The minor leagues, the turnaround. Travis d'Arnaud ended up being, I think he was an all-star like last year. Travis d'Arnaud is
he turned into a
serviceable player,
pretty decent guy.
Yeah. Of course, Drabek would be nothing. Taylor would be nothing. Wallace would be nothing. So away she goes with Roy Halladay. But of course, he would go on to the Phillies. He would throw a perfect game in the regular season against the Marlins, and he would throw a no-hitter in the playoffs. It was, we talked, we were asked in a recent mailbag about whether we loved Jose or Doc more. And I think we both said Jose because he had those fuck you moments, and he got to prove everybody wrong. And Doc got to do that, but he didn't get to do that as a Blue Jay. I remember being so proud when he threw the perfect game. And when his first playoff start was a no-hitter, it was like, wow, if we had this, it would have been just the greatest possible thing.
For me, it was a really interesting moment as a sports fan because it came right at like, was it 2010? So I'm like, I just turned 22. So that's like peak like petty, angry sports fan years. And I've always hated the Phillies. I still hate the Phillies. And having to sort of, especially at that, like now, if that happened, it'd be very easy as 32-year-old me to sort of put it aside and be like, well, like, that's amazing for Doc. That he did that, B, the context, like, awesome. Putting that aside, it's 22-year-old me was tough.
You were angry. You were not happy.
It wasn't that I wasn't happy. It was hard for me to separate how happy I was for Doc and how angry I was that he didn't do it with us and that he did it with the Phillies.
Right, you hated the Phillies. Right.
I hate the Phillies, and it was also like, it was hard to accept that like that it wasn't really anger at Halladay. It was anger at the Jays.
Right.
That they had literally Roy Halladay and could never put it together. So it was kind of like, look what he does.
Yeah.
When he made the playoffs, he threw a literal no-hitter.
Boy, oh boy, the 2010 Phillies, 97 and 65, the rotation, Halladay, Hamels, Oswalt
there?
Yeah, like crazy. They had Kyle Kendrick.
That rotation was fucking gross.
And like, peak Ryan Howard, peak Chase Utley, crazy. Jamie Victorino, Jason Worth. Yeah, incredible. I think it's interesting that you sort of battled those things. I remember the big thing that year was we got Halladay versus Lincecum in a playoff duel, and that was like the game to watch because those fucking Giants that were in this every single year back then. Ugh.
I'm so happy that you are on the same side of the Giants discourse.
Good Lord.
I am.
Good. The people, our friends who lowered themselves.
Hate it. Ugh.
Lowered themselves into becoming Giants fans.
Disgusting.
Disgusting.
To this day, they shouldn't be allowed to live that down.
It's crazy to me. Anyway.
Yeah.
Boy, Anthopolous sneaky gets busy this little bit. He also trades Brandon League for Brandon Morrow. That's a pretty nice piece of business.
That is a good piece of business. I actually forgot how Brandon Morrow came to Toronto. I was thinking about him the other day because I was playing the show and he popped up.
And then in his first draft in June, he drafts Deck McGuire, 11th overall. Okay, not
Okay.
great. Aaron Sanchez, 34th overall. Noah Syndergaard, 38th overall. Asher Wojciechowski, who I think is still kicking around, but is maybe burned out of the league.
Man, Asher, what? Jesus.
Justin Nicolino, Sam Dyson, Sean Nolan, Dalton Pompey, Miles J. And he drafts Chris Bryant in the 18th round of the 2010 draft.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah. Sneaky.
Huh.
A double. He did his thing. They traded Brett Wallace by July of this year for Anthony Gose, who would, of course, become
Devin
Travis. And Anthony Gose, who I believe is breaking into the league as a pitcher this year.
He definitely was last year. I don't know if I haven't seen anything about him this year, but I do remember that was a story last year, and he was apparently pretty good.
Yeah. 2010 Blue Jays would bounce back. This is sort of the irony as they are better in 2010 without Doc than they were the year previous when they were 75-87. They go 85-77, still fourth in the East, still 11 games back of a playoff. But it is the story of 2010 is Jose Bautista officially becomes a thing.
Swinging a drive, high fly ball left field. This is deep. This is 50. Jose Bautista, his first hit against Hernandez is home run number 50.
Right, he hits 54 home runs. Vernon Wells does not play that well, but Jose Bautista becomes like a capital T thing. Adam Lind has a crappy year, but it's Bautista, and it was John Buck, and Edwin Encarnacion hits 20 home runs, but cannot stay on the field at third base. And you sort of start to see this next generation of Blue Jay teams create itself under the pile of rubble that was the end of the previous regime. And Ricky Romero makes 32 starts. Romero, Markham, Cecil, Morrow, Zepchinski is your most common five.
It's funny you bring up both Vernon and then all those sort of draft moves and early moves of Anthopolous, because in my brain, the first Anthopolous move was getting out from Wells' contract.
That was his first move was getting out from Halladay. It's Wells' January 21st, 2011 is Vernon Wells.
I know, which is crazy to me. But like as we've talked about many times over the story time, these Jays years have sort of been rewritten in all our minds. And like the Wells deal I thought was at least a year earlier than it was. And I remember it being like, the new guy's great. He got us out of that contract, which also, as we discussed, isn't as bad a contract as it may have seemed.
No, absolutely not.
But that is my first Anthopolous memory.
So you want to talk about memories of this era. The very next year, I mean, you talk about, it's hard to explain to somebody that wasn't there in 2011 what it was like to have Brett Lawrie appear.
Deep. And you can forget about it. Brett Lawrie has just walked off the Red Sox. Home run number 8.
It's one of those things, like, if you weren't there, it would be impossible to explain to you what it was like to show up the next year and it's Brett Lawrie, and he is the 43 games of Brett Lawrie in 2011 is like...
Is it 43?
Yeah, man, 43 games.
Again, memory being wrong, I thought it was like 2 weeks.
It's about a month and a half, yeah.
Obviously the walk off against Boston is the big moment.
And the Grand Slam, yeah.
But man, I didn't realize it was 43 games. But yeah, it was like, to your point of like, you had to be there. It was like the next superstar. Like, not even like, it's funny being on, as talking about Jose Bautista becoming a thing and like literally having a guy who hit 50 home runs. But like Brett Lawrie was like,
dude,
I'm sure the Canadianness played into it.
It did, but
it was also like, this guy's going to be the best player in the league.
The way that he played was like, boy, oh boy, it's hard to. It was like, there's no way he's not going to be a superstar. He already is. Like, it was immediate. He was going to be a superstar. But Bautista hits 43 that next year.
Especially with the Jays, of a team that had for years, since 93, maybe you can make an argument since like the Delgado years, like a team with no sense of identity at all. Mm-hmm. A team that was literally changing up their uniforms every few years, had such a lack of identity. And then you have a guy like Lawrie who's Canadian and plays like he did. Not only do you think he was going to be a star, but you thought he was like going to be not just like face the franchise in a typical sense, but like was going to set the tone for this like rough and tumble kind of team, which is kind of funny based on what the Jays would become right after he left.
Yeah, and it's funny hearing you say that. It's like how long it took for them to accept that like the new face of the team was Bautista, right? Like it was Lawrie, and then it was like, you know, we're gonna find the 2012 guys the next year. It's gonna be Reyes. It's like the whole time it's like it's Bautista, man. Like you have the guy.
That's a really good point that I think is obviously I think that's a thought and like a consideration I've had before, but I don't think I've ever been able to like phrase that way. That's a really good way to put it.
They go 81-81 under John Farrell in 2011 in that crazy Brett Lawrie year. Yunel Escobar, one of the guys to remember. Eric Thames, who took a sign that said "Blame Thames" at one point. I was hard on Eric Thames because he was stealing Travis Snyder's job. Rajai Davis came aboard, and they traded for Colby Rasmus in the middle of that year. 24-year-old Colby Rasmus.
I remember exactly where I was when that trade happened.
Boy, he was bad in his first season with the Jays.
I was at in the midst of taking a bartending course because I had just moved back to Toronto after being dumped and was kind of lost. I was like, oh, I'll learn to be a bartender. And I remember I was at lunch sitting alone in a sushi restaurant eating like a bento box that had it had the score, I guess. Or, yeah, I guess it would have been the score at that time still on the TV. And that the breaking ticker came up. They had traded, I want to say it was Edwin Jackson for Colby Rasmus.
I think you're right.
And I remember I was so high on Colby.
Yeah, he had that one incredible year. Pardon me. He was traded by the Cardinals with Miller, Talbot, and Walters for Dotel, Edwin Jackson, Corey Patterson, and Mark Zepchinski. So yes,
I was ready for Colby Rasmus to be my favorite player until, and like in a lot of ways, maybe he was.
I was going to will it to happen if it wasn't going to be either way.
Yeah. Well, let's have the hot dog picture, I guess.
That's right, the chicken dog up front. Boy, oh boy.
What? Like, just a lot of... It's funny how Anthopolous now is sort of held up as the golden god in Toronto, which, like, I understand. I'm not saying it's incorrect. But, like, a lot of just, like, throwing darts at a board those first few years.
Well, I mean, they gave up nothing in the other end of that, right? There's, like, nothing. Edwin
like,
Jackson.
It just feels like a lot of... But that's what I mean. It feels like a lot of... Until the Florida trade and the Dickey trade, it's a lot of, like, maybe not so much the time, but definitely in retrospect, like, experimental, let's see if this works kind of deals.
Boy, oh boy. Brandon Morrow was good in 2012. 2.96 ERA in 20 starts. Boy, oh boy.
Jeez.
But man, everybody in this lineup is so bad. Nobody hit OPS plus over 100 except for Bautista and Encarnacion, who both are unbelievable. And this is the year that Edwin moves to DH and hits 42 home runs. And you're like, oh, I see what's going on here. We have two good hitters.
Right. Maybe we should build it. Maybe we should build around those two.
2012, they also trade Travis Snyder in the middle of a game for Brad Lincoln, which is among the worst. That's as low as I've been as a Blue Jays fan, I think. To be honest with you, I was so sad. And then Escobar writes homophobic language on his face.
Yep.
2012 season was really dark. It was a really
year.
bad season. And then the next year, I mean, this is you talk about crazy off seasons. You talk about we've done the story time about remember where you were when they traded for Tulo, and remember where you were when they traded for Price, right? Do you remember where you were November 19th, 2012, when the deal was Henderson Alvarez, Anthony Desclafini, Yunel Escobar, Adani Hechavarria, Jake Marisnik, Jeff Mathis, and Justin Nicolino for Bonifacio, Buck, Burley, Johnson, Reyes, and Cash?
I do. I was sitting in my basement apartment at Queen and Dovercourt in Toronto, and I remember at the time, I don't know if it's better now with the way cell technology works, but my phone didn't get reception in my apartment. And I remember running out of my apartment onto the street to call my friend and be like, do you see what's happening? Because like we thought this was it.
Yes.
The team was there. Those pieces around Bautista and Encarnacion were happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Incredible. I reconnected with a friend I hadn't spoken to in years this night and went to his house and we wrote down lineups on paper. We were so excited. My friend Adam, who at the time I was like, we were in a small feud and I was like, dude, the Blue Jays are going to be relevant. And he was like, let's put our problems aside. And I remember this starting with like the Blue Jays are getting Josh Johnson was what Ken Rosenthal said.
Yeah.
Burley,
Yes.
it was Burley headed to Blue Jays along with Josh Johnson. Sources tell me, and John Morosi. Ken Rosenthal tweeted at 6:13, and then 6:20. Inclusion of Reyes unconfirmed. What we know is Burley and Josh Johnson to Jays, Escobar, Hechavarria to Marlins. More coming both ways. Again, more names to this. The big ones: Reyes, Burley, Josh Johnson. This is 6:30. I remember where I was. I was at the Score with Andrew McKay. It was me and Andrew McKay. That's where we were. And then I got off my shift.
McKay took that season really hard.
He did. He sort of invented the term full Jays talk, was Andrew McKay.
Yeah.
Sort of quoted. it would, of course, end in tears. Reyes would get hurt. Johnson would never be good. Burley would go on to be a legend, however. And Noah Syndergaard, I don't think ever played again. I can't remember.
That's right, because the Dickey trade was like 2 days later, I want to say.
Dickey trade was a couple weeks. It was a couple weeks, like first week of December, I think. I'll go back and
really, damn.
It felt everything
up.
was back to back in the day, right? So November 19th was the deal. They also signed Melky Cabrera that morning. People forget.
That's right. I also thought Melky was going to be a big piece.
And then
I wanted Melky to be good.
He left, and it was like, oh, by the way, his spine has been broken for the last. It's like, oh,
that's right.
Cool.
That's right.
Do we not do physicals? Is that another thing we're doing? It was the 19th was the first deal, and the second deal was December 17th, 2012. Wilmer Becerra, John Buck, Travis Darno for Syndergaard, and Syndergaard for Dickey, Nikias, and Josh Tolley, who you have to take if you have Ari Dickey.
Yes. It's funny you bring up the Reyes injury and like where we're used. I remember the Reyes injury because I remember that year was weird because like they started terribly and then they went on, I want to say it was like an 11-game win streak to sort of get back in the picture, and then the wheels started to fall off again. And the Reyes injury actually might have been pre-win streak, but I remember it wasn't going well and Reyes hurt himself. I want to say sliding into second.
That's correct, and he cried.
Yeah, and it was like, well, there it is.
Yeah, there's the thing.
It was that thing of like, it's not going well, but the team is built so well that like they could turn around at a moment's notice.
Yeah, I believe it was.
And then it was like, oh, okay.
I believe it was April 12th was the game where he injures himself, and he does not play again until June 26th.
Yeah,
tough.
And it was, and then fuck Jose Reyes forever. Also
turns out he's a piece of shit, so fuck him. Yeah,
that's fine. And we got a much better shortstop for him.
That's right. We all know where this goes. It is all a road to the team we know and love, and we talk about the 2015 team. Take a drink all the time, and you could find the 2015 trades talk on previous episodes of Sportsfeld Storytime. We're going to cap this one off there. I think getting us to the Florida trade is sort of Darno. I think being involved in this sort of closes the book on the beginning of and the end of that. So that is it for this month's edition of Sportsfeld Storytime. That's the Halladay versus Burnett story. Had a great time going back and looking back at this era of the Blue Jays, a team that is always near and dear to my heart, and I think was both better and worse than I remember. We thank you guys so much, the Patreon audience. You guys are the best for coming along on this ride with us. We will talk to you again next month for a brand new episode of Sportsfeld Storytime.